Welcome back. What you're looking at is a 3D rendering. This doesn't exist yet. These are plans that were sent to me by my guys over at Proof Media Mix. They're the guys that hire me to do all the bullet and the various different alcohol related branding items. In this case, they asked me if I could make this in 3.5 weeks, basically throughout the month of May. And I went over to Harbor Freight. I started with a cart this time that existed, considering the time crunch. I didn't need to make a cart from scratch. And this is a kit that Harbor Freight sells. It's a 4x4 utility cart. Comes as a kit. And the plans called for the kit to be 4 by 3 feet wide. So I'm cutting off about 6 inches. It was like 30, this thing was like 39 by 46, something like that. So I had to make it a little bit skinnier left to right based on their parameters. And now I didn't ask too many questions. I'm not sure if this had to fit precisely in some area, but I just followed the directions and I was able to use my cold saw from KBC to make the rails to the width that I needed. And now here I'm using my Bridgeport, which I love. And I'm using the Bridgeport for metal. Later on you'll see it being used for wood. And I'm just drilling out. This whole utility cart is designed to bolt together, and that's exactly what I do. But since I have the opportunity to weld it, which not most people can do, if you're going to buy a cart like this from Harbor Freight and just bolt it together, I clean up with my little die grinder. I clean up the paint, and I get in there with my MP215 from Lincoln Electric, and I'm able to make sure that this thing is never going to rattle apart. More than likely, this thing will be used for the first event that it's needed for, and it'll go in storage somewhere. Maybe it'll sit in the corner somewhere. But I guarantee you this will not get the abuse that this Harbor Freight cart was intended for. Now I weld the underside and I weld the upper side, and there's no way this is going to rack or come apart now in any way. Of course, the bolts could become loose and fall out, and the cart would still be fine. Now I'm putting the suspension in. This is a great cart. This was only like $300 and something. Remember a couple months ago I made a cart for myself in the backyard. I could have just bought this, but then I wouldn't have had an exciting video and bragging rights. And you notice I'm using a drill driver, which is a ratchet driver. Those things are amazing. Now, since I made the cart skinnier, I needed to make the actual axle skinnier. This axle comes with the kit, and it's pretty fortified. It's a very thick, almost a 1/4 inch thick U channel, and I cut out whatever I needed to, maybe 5 inches. Weld it together, and now here I am bolting it to the leaf springs. And I suppose you could have bolted that axle under or over the leaf springs. In this case, I welded it. I keep saying welding. I bolted it under the leaf springs just to lower the center of gravity for this whole thing. And the wheels are 13-inch rims. The image calls for chrome rims, and I told Chuck I don't think I'd be able to get chrome rims right away. I did order stainless steel flat hubs, flat, perfectly flat, like kind of for a hot rod, but they didn't come in time for me to finish this video, so when the cart was delivered or picked up for delivery, I just sent it along with the box that came that morning for the hubcaps. So I wasn't able to get a beauty shot of it with the flat aluminum hubcaps. Now I'm just bolting on the tow bar, or that might be called the tang. I'm not sure what that would be called. And now here is the hitch stuff. This all just bolts together. This just took probably about an hour worth of work. And then now, based on the size of that, I designed the upper box. This upper box I designed in Illustrator, and I have a method by which I make finger joints, and I finger joint all this stuff. Now this is just the structure. It's going to get completely covered with veneer and a lot of design elements, so I'm not overly concerned about the quality of this particular plywood, or even as long as it's flat, really, honestly. You could tell this is the wood from Home Depot, which I always say is probably from a banana tree. I don't know what brand of wood this is or what species of wood this is, but I always like to make my tongue and tabs and slots tight so that when I hammer it together, it stays together. Now there it is. I've come this far in probably just one day. One day's worth of work. It's probably the end of that first day. And now here it is, the beginning of the second day. You can see the sun is up in the background. And I'm making the details according to the drawing. This upper part had a little bit of thickness to it. The upper bar area has a rail, and that rail is a certain thickness, and according to the drawings and some of the elevations, this upper bar area had a thickness underneath it. So it's kind of dead space, which is fine. It fortifies the top. It gives the thing a lot of presence. And I'm just doing this. It's all going to get veneered with some particular material. I'm not 100% sure yet at this stage of the build. I just know that I have to mimic the shape that's in the drawing, and that's precisely what I'm doing. I'm just mimicking that shape. By the way, to the best of my ability, a lot of these design elements that are shown in these 3D renderings are really suggestions. They don't have to be exactly precisely perfect. No one's ever going to check. No one's going to pull out a ruler. As long as it looks like it, they're happy. I mean, there are no architects involved. And here you see it's shown as oak in the drawing. It's called out as oak. So I had some beautiful straight grained white oak left over from a project last summer. And here I'm using it. And you see how hefty that piece is. It's going to be a nice thick bar rail. I'm going to veneer the top so it looks like one big chunk once it's all done, because the veneer is only just a fraction of an inch thick, a couple of millimeters. And the veneer is left over from the same job I did last year. And the pin nails help keep things in place. Pin nails, amazing. The battery operated pin nail has been the savior of my shop in the last few months. I use it so often. And now again here I'm using the white oak as a design element. If you go back and see that image in the beginning, there's this just a graphic detail. I'm sure whoever designed it just made it just a artistic decision to have this break in the cart, just a graphic break, and you could see it there. And I use those spacers that I'm pointing at to make sure that it's the same parallel from each side. And then also I'm using that to keep it clamped in place. It's all going to get veneered so I can screw right into the box and not be overly concerned. So that's, while that glue is drying, that's going to be a finished piece. It's all going to get sanded and painted. Even though there's a burn mark in it, I sand that burn mark out. And now this top is also going to get a veneer on it, and what I probably am going to have to do is fill that in with Bondo to smooth it all out. Quick update, you can see I got this plywood substructure, and on top of that I'm building these white oak details. This is going to get a veneer. The veneer is flattening out on the car over there. This whole top's going to get a veneer. And you can see I'm beginning to figure out how to cover up my end grain. This gets a set of doors, so I got a 1/2 inch piece on the inside, then I'm going to glue a 1/4 inch piece on the outside. So it's a series of laminates that start to build up the structure, and everything will get sanded and planed in and smoothed in. To give this more of a detail, this is going to be protruding, this is going to be protruding, and this is going to be just a small veneer piece. So you have this detail and that detail and that. This whole plane is all going to morph into one plane. Double doors, we're going to be in the same plane. I'm going to carry the tap in there, which I still have yet to source, and then there's going to be an ice tray in here. And moving along pretty briskly on this one. You can see how I have the inner, which goes end grain to that, and then this grabs the end grain here and the side of this piece. You can see right here what's happening. This gives us a lot of strength. We've got glue in this way, glue on that way. A lot of strength. So I'm building the face frame into the end. And now I need to fill in that gap there on the bottom. And I just put a filler strip underneath, but then I laminate the front of it with more white oak. I made a little bit of a mistake here. I used 2 pieces of white oak with some sapwood in it, and it shows later. Only I would notice it. It's one of those things that's just super annoying. Now, if you go back and look at the beginning of the drawing, this whole card has this graphic element wrapped around it. It's these yellow strips. They're raised, so I'm going to have to make them out of MDF, and then everything in between is going to be white oak. Now, I have this leftover veneer of white oak, and I have very little of it. Basically, what you see there is mostly all I got. I have one other piece about the same size. And so now I have to cut these strips up and prep them so that they're going to go right where I need them. I'm not going to be able to veneer the whole side of each side of this cart and then just put the yellow strips over them. I break up that strip and then I glue it right where it's needed with a little bit of bleed. And, oh, you see me, I couldn't find my line. And now I'm using that throwaway piece of board with screws to glue it. And while each one is gluing, I'm working on other parts of the cart. Now I'm just prepping the top for veneer. I have that big piece of sandpaper on there. I use it a lot. It happens to be round, and the reason why it's round, it's for a 20-inch disc sander, but the fact that it's round keeps it from getting caught up on square edges. Now I'm veneering this, so I want to make sure that it's totally flat. And I first sanded it to get rid of any of the high spots in the wood, and now I put Bondo in there. And you see that stick that I have? I have 80 grit on the whole thing so that it stays and references the entire top everywhere so that it's plainly flat. Now as those veneers start overlapping the edge, I'm just using a flush cut bit to make sure that they're all flush and get rid of any of the fuzz. And now I'm just making sure I'm wrapping that oak veneer around everything. Again, just using that clamp with screws to hold everything in. And all the screw holes are going to get covered up later. Now here you can see how I'm able to make that corner. I got my veneer clamped and I'm using a reference underneath to reference above. So I'm using that ruler to reference underneath, and now I'm using that as my cutting edge. And I start with this piece and glue that in place. And then I do the left and the right. Now I'm just using regular wood glue there. I tape it down, and then I happen to have this piece of corian that was left over from the old, remember I made a wine cart a couple years ago? It was like a rolling kitchen in a camper. And that was the corian that I used. And I have it left over to use as a perfectly flat clamping surface. And now I let that dry for a couple of hours while I'm working on other parts of this project. And now those are the strips that are going to go down those long sides. And I already cut my 45 degree with the razor blade, and I also sanded it a little bit just to square up the cut. I know some guys would use a veneer saw, but I just razor cut it and then just use a sanding block to square it up. Just very lightly sanded it. And I'm just using a piece of scrap wood to spread the glue. You don't want too much glue. You don't want the squeeze out to go everywhere, especially it's all going to have to get painted later on. And now I'm using this same piece of corian around, but then I also had to clamp the end. And now I got to let it set up. And then once it sets up for a couple of hours, I take it off, flush cut it. You got to be super careful. This is a good veneer with a paper backing, so it's unlikely that it'll rip out. But I always got a climb cut. When you climb cut, you almost will never get a rip out. If you conventional cut, you're going to get a tear out. I'm just using my card scraper from DFM Tools. And there you see, I tend to use my flush cut bit with no plate. It just gives me an opportunity to see exactly what I'm doing. And now the bar material showed up, and it takes 2 tanks. And I spoke to one of the consultants there, and he says, sometimes we drop the tanks into a square garbage bin so that we could put ice in there. And that's exactly what I was able to get. I got a square garbage bin off of Amazon, and I wanted these tanks to sink down as low as possible. I was a little naive. I had never worked with these tanks, so I didn't really know how I was going to install them. I was just in the process of just copying the imagery. Now, if I got really creative, I could have cut that framework below to have this dip down even further, but I didn't need to. Now, this is just the right height. This is the recycling bin goes in there. And I cut my hole a little wide, so I just glued some strips around it just to shore it up, keep it from jumping around. Now, this was their idea. Jan, one of the guys that works there, like I said, he's an expert on this stuff. He said, put the bin, we drop the tanks in the bin, put ice in there. There's not a lot of room for ice, but then again, this isn't going to be a real full bar service. Now, this is old 1/4 inch thick corian that I had, and I happen to have had just the right amount. I did have to scab a couple pieces together to get exactly what I needed. But this is 1/4 inch corian, was left over from a job I did in New York at least 10 years ago. Now this is where this piece is going to live across the top of everything, so I needed to put a lip so that the corian would live on top of that lip. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding that lip, I'm gluing it, and I'm screwing it. And there it is. And I did put a bull nose on the other end. There you can see a little bit of the bull nose. I backed it with a bit of wood. Now this is just aluminum left over from the sign job that I did with Wesley. This is just very thin aluminum, probably a couple of millimeters thick. And I'm painting it that yellow, which just happened to be spot on. This system comes as one unit. For one price, you get both tanks, all the valves, and the pressure tank. What doesn't come with it is the tower, which I had to buy separately. But now I'm just following the instructions. This pressurizes the manifold. The manifold then goes, pressurizes both these tanks, and then this is the tap. So this is pressure in, liquid out. So it's a little bit easier than I first anticipated. And everything is quick connect. You take these quick connects off, you take the tank out, fill it or replace it, put them back. It's a pretty cool system. All the while I'm still veneering as I'm going. Every once in a while I'll set up something to get glued into place, and then I let it dry as I'm working on some other section of it. And it's really important to always manage what's getting glued and what's getting dried at the same time. And now I begin to make the strips. The strips are getting made out of MDF. It's the only thing I could think of. And with time and budget, this is the one thing that seemed to work out fine. The only annoying thing is that everything needed to be primered, and when I primered them for the very first time, I made sure I painted both sides. If you know anything about MDF, you paint one side, it'll pucker, or it'll cup to the side that's painted. So to keep everything capiche, I make sure I paint both sides. And now I'm starting to build up with my Total Boat spar varnish. I'm just building up coats. And again, with the fenders, everything needs to be painted white first before it gets painted yellow. And these fenders are the exact shape they need to be. Now I'm gluing in the aluminum. And this is just really more utility. I'm just using a little bit of glue to hold those panels in there. And you see how I bent it around the corner? That's just because those pieces just happen to be that long. I cut one piece into 3 strips, and I was able to use one to bend around the corner. And this is where the corian goes in. I'm just checking to make sure how it can come in and out, because I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to hide the bar details. And I'm going to assemble and put the tower in place. And the tower is going to have 2 taps in it. The original drawing called for 3 taps, and after I spoke with their expert, he said just make it 2 is really all we need. And this is a separate purchase, the tap itself. I might have got this one on Amazon. I went to a place called Bar Elements, or maybe it's called Liquor Elements, Bar Elements maybe, and that's where I got the tanks from. Now it's building up coats of the yellow. This took several days. If you ever use any type of Rust-Oleum, which is I hate Rust-Oleum. I hate it so much, but it seems to be the only paint we can get these days. So you got to live with it. And now I'm painting everything yellow, several coats. That might be the end of like 3 coats, which just takes forever. And now making the doors, and I'm putting hardwood edge on the doors. It's MDF core, veneer, and I cut them to size, and I always glue on these hard edges and let them go long so that I can flush cut them perfectly. And now you see me adding more of the edges with the 23 gauge nailer. I can't even tell where I am. So in that first bit I was cutting off the very first 2. I usually glue 2 on, let them dry, flush cut them, and then glue the second 2 on. And here I'm just using the economy of the clamps. Now here it is probably several hours later. I just give everything a light palm sanding. I'm just working in those hard edge veneers. I installed the conventional hinges on off camera because they're such a pain in the ass. I just installed the doors, and these hinges are fairly garbage. I had to replace the hinge pin with a bronze TIG rod so that the hinges weren't so sloppy. So I was able to get the tolerances up a little bit, and now I got the doors pretty in line. The big problem with installing these hinges is getting things lined up. And that's why I like to put one screw here, and then assess where it's supposed to live and put one screw and one screw. I check my alignment, and if I need to make any adjustments in the subsequent screws, I will position the hole that way, this way, that way, inside of the hole, and then I'm able to manipulate the hinge around. But I got it pretty good right now. Now I'm going to put some stoppers in there. I didn't want to put European hinges in here because considering this is a trailer, those European hinge doors could pop off. I wanted to consider this more like a boat or a camper where a proper full pin hinge is going to keep it in place stronger and longer than a European style hinge. If I had a European style hinge, I could adjust the hell out of it and get it perfect. But then one bump and both doors could pop right off. Let me put a stopper and a latch up here and we'll take it from there. I recently got myself a Bridgeport to use for everything. Wood and metal and plastic and whatever. I just needed a good stout drill press, and here you could see I can drill both of these. These are spring-loaded detents. I could drill both of these and get these little brackets be exactly the same. Now I drill out for the detent itself, and then the detents have these dimpled screws which need to make some room for, and that's what I'm doing here. I love using the Bridgeport for everything and having a nice clean vise and some, you see I got some stuff from KBC, so check out KBC while you're at it. Again, now you see where these detents go. I could have put them on the bottom, I could have put them on the top. They looked ugly in each direction, so it didn't really matter. And here I'm just holding them in place, and then I drill up inside the cabinet. And these detents come with a stainless steel plate, which I was able to install a little bit later on after I put them in there. And now getting these doors in like that is just really just a pain in the ass. And it was hard to find some good hardware in a pinch. I probably said it earlier in this voiceover, but this was a 3-week turnaround from the beginning until the delivery. And if you follow on my Patreon, you could see a lot of behind the scenes stuff on this. Now with the coat of white primer dried, it's really just white Rust-Oleum again, I'm able to lay that yellow on there that's really, really, really vibrant. And now I get to putting on the yellow strips. And if you notice, I'm using spacers in every opportunity that I can. I don't want to risk trusting a pencil line, which I'm horrible at, transferring pencil lines from rulers to reel. And in this case, you see I'm using a little sled that I made up to make all the angles. Now I get the miters as tight as I can. You see I'm holding a little sample of a miter there so I could feel what it feels like on each side. And this is just some PVA glue, and that and the 23 gauge pin nails, which are almost imperceptible. I do have to go back with a little tiny paintbrush and just fill in where those 23 gauge pen nails go. In most cases I dabbed paint over them, some cases I didn't. You didn't even notice. Now you see I have the spacers there. Again, they're just held in with just tape rolled over on itself, just to hold them in place while I glue and put that up. And where those miters are on the outside edge, I got them tight enough where all I needed to do was go back in with a paintbrush and just fill in the edge of where the two sharp corners met. And that was enough to fill in whatever you could see, where you could see a little bit of wood. And it made it feel like one nice strip that started and wrapped itself completely around and came back up the other side. At this point, I'm very happy to be this far along. Now I'm making the sign that was designated in the original 3D model, the 3D rendering. Johnnie Walker, they wanted the bar cart, so I got rid of the word bar. And now I'm putting the fenders on. And I just got lucky that the fenders match what came with this kit. Just pure luck. Pure luck. And I painted the signs white. This is like the next day perhaps. And with a nice dry roller, I'm able to roller over that white and let the letters stay down inside. And I got this at Tractor Supply. Maybe I got this at Harbor Freight. This is the smallest tang leg that I could find, or I don't know what you would call it, a trailer foot. It folds up out of the way. This trailer from Harbor Freight didn't come with one, and there now it's always able to sit down on its own. This is extremely light, so it's not really difficult, but to have it just sit on the ground would be kind of sloppy. Now I got this from the team, the branding team. It is a Johnnie Walker umbrella. And now I want to be able to make sure that you could pull that piece of corian in and out. So that's why it might not have showed it in the rendering, but I put it in the corner. I took some artistic license so that I could put that piece of corian there, and then you could still pull out and access all the bar stuff, the canisters and the pressure tank, and not have to take the umbrella out of the middle. And here I shot a little video explaining to the guys what's going on, but here you could see, which I didn't show me making, is that skirt that covers everything up inside, and that just goes there, that sits there, and then the corian goes back on top and covers everything up. Now it's time for the beauties, and I take it over. Although I have a golf cart, I don't have a hitch on my golf cart. I only have a hitch on my side-by-side, and here it is in my backyard. The umbrella is working beautifully. And there it is. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, Johnnie Walker. Thank you, Proof Media Mix. That's the team that hires me to do all this fun stuff for the last 12, 13 years now. So, Bobby, Chuck, guys, thank you very, very much. Just doing a little demo. And there it is. Check me out on Patreon for some behind-the-scenes stuff for these type of builds as I go. I now post more detailed behind-the-scenes stuff only on Patreon. Occasionally on Instagram I'll send just an image. But for real detailed stuff, check me out on Patreon. Thank you for the love and support.